On the morning of September 11, 2001, the United States faced a nightmare that would change the world forever. It was a clear blue sky in New York City, a normal Tuesday morning. People rushed to work, children went to school, and no one imagined that history was about to take a dark turn. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The impact shook the entire building, sending fire and smoke into the sky. Many thought it was an accident. But just 17 minutes later, at 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 struck the South Tower. At that moment, it became clear America was under attack. The Twin Towers burned, people trapped inside screamed for help, and some even jumped to escape the flames. The world watched in shock as live television broadcasted every second. Meanwhile, in a school classroom in Florida, President George W. Bush was reading a children's book to students. An aide whispered in his ear, "A second plane hit the second tower. America is under attack." Bush froze for a few moments, his eyes staring forward. Millions of people later questioned his reaction. Should he have left immediately? Should he have said something? But in that instant, he carried the weight of a nation under fire. The horror did not stop in New York. At 9:37 a.m., another plane crashed into the Pentagon, the very heart of America's military power. And at 10:03 a.m., United Flight 93 went down in Pennsylvania after passengers fought back against the hijackers. For George W. Bush, this was not only a national tragedy, it was a turning point. The man who entered the White House just months earlier now had to lead America through war, fear, and revenge. The world was about to change forever, and Bush was right at the center of it. After the dust settled on September 11th, the world looked to George W. Bush for answers. The nation was in shock. Families searched for missing loved ones. New York was burning, and fear spread across America. On the night of the attacks, Bush addressed the nation from the White House. His voice was firm but emotional. "We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them." With these words, Bush declared the beginning of what would later be called the War on Terror. In the weeks that followed, intelligence pointed to Osama bin Laden and his group, Al-Qaeda, hiding in Afghanistan under the protection of the Taliban. Bush gave an ultimatum: hand over the terrorists or face consequences. The Taliban refused. And so, on October 7, 2001, the United States launched Operation Enduring Freedom. American warplanes bombed Taliban strongholds, missiles lit up the night sky over Kabul, and U.S. soldiers stepped into the rugged mountains of Afghanistan. For many Americans, it was justice. But for others, it marked the beginning of a long, bloody war with no clear end. Bush's approval ratings soared. People rallied behind him, waving flags and chanting, "USA! USA!" In those early days, he was seen as a strong leader who would protect the nation at any cost. But the path he chose would lead to nearly 20 years of conflict, trillions of dollars spent, and countless lives lost. Still, in 2001, Bush appeared confident. The world saw him as a commander-in-chief ready for battle. But behind closed doors, he knew this war was only the beginning of something far more complicated. While the war in Afghanistan was still raging, George W. Bush turned his eyes toward another enemy: Iraq. For years, Saddam Hussein, the dictator of Iraq, had been a thorn in America's side. He had fought a war with Iran, invaded Kuwait, and challenged U.S. power in the Middle East. But after 9/11, Bush and his advisors claimed that Saddam was even more dangerous. The White House said Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, and maybe even nuclear weapons. They warned that Saddam could give these weapons to terrorists, just like those who attacked on 9/11. The message was simple: act now, or face another disaster. In 2002, Bush gave a famous speech calling Iraq, Iran, and North Korea the axis of evil. He declared that America had a duty to confront these nations before it was too late. By early 2003, despite protests around the world, Bush launched a massive invasion. On March 20, 2003, U.S. missiles lit up the skies of Baghdad in what was called shock and awe. Television screens showed explosions over the Iraqi capital, while Bush promised the world that America would make Iraq free. Within weeks, Saddam's army collapsed. U.S. troops stormed into Baghdad, and on May 1, 2003, Bush stood on the deck of an aircraft carrier, under a giant banner reading, "Mission Accomplished." He declared that major combat in Iraq was over. But the truth was very different. No weapons of mass destruction were ever found. The war dragged on for years, leading to chaos, insurgency, and the rise of even deadlier groups. Bush's bold gamble in Iraq would later become one of the most controversial decisions in modern history. After the fall of Saddam Hussein, George W. Bush believed America had secured a great victory. But in reality, Iraq was descending into chaos. Without Saddam's government, the country had no strong authority. Old rivalries between Sunnis and Shias exploded into violence. Militias roamed the streets, bombs went off in markets, and ordinary Iraqis lived in constant fear. The U.S. military faced a new kind of enemy, not a regular army, but an insurgency. Small groups of fighters launched ambushes, planted roadside bombs, and attacked American patrols. Every day, U.S. soldiers were killed and civilians suffered even more. Then came a scandal that shook the world. In 2004, photos emerged from Abu Ghraib prison, showing Iraqi prisoners being abused and humiliated by U.S. guards. These images destroyed America's reputation and gave more fuel to the insurgency. As years passed, al-Qaeda in Iraq grew stronger, carrying out deadly suicide bombings. By 2006, Iraq was on the edge of full civil war. Entire neighborhoods in Baghdad were divided by concrete walls, separating Sunni and Shia communities. For Bush, the war that was supposed to make America safer had instead unleashed chaos. The dream of a free and stable Iraq turned into a nightmare of endless bloodshed. And yet U.S. troops were stuck in a war with no easy way out. By the late 2000s, George W. Bush's presidency was collapsing under the weight of 2 long wars and a failing economy. The war in Iraq dragged on with no clear victory. American soldiers were still dying, and billions of dollars were spent every month. Many Americans began to question, was this war worth it? At the same time, in 2007-2008, the world faced the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. Banks collapsed, millions of people lost their homes, and unemployment soared. Ordinary Americans were suffering, and Bush was blamed for not stopping the disaster. Around the world, Bush's image had fallen to one of the most unpopular U.S. presidents in modern history. Once claiming to bring freedom and democracy, he was now seen as the man who destabilized the Middle East and weakened America's economy. When Bush left office in January 2009, he did not leave as a hero. Instead, he left with approval ratings near historic lows. His legacy was forever tied to 2 words: Iraq War. Yet even today, the debate continues. Was George W. Bush a president who defended America after 9/11, or a leader who led his country into one of the biggest mistakes in modern history? George W. Bush left office in 2009 with scars that America still feels today. His decisions changed the course of history, not just for the United States, but for the entire world. The Iraq War toppled Saddam Hussein, but it also unleashed chaos that gave rise to terrorism, civil wars, and eventually groups like ISIS. The Middle East would never be the same again. At home, millions of Americans questioned the cost of his wars. Thousands of soldiers died, trillions of dollars were spent, and the financial crisis destroyed trust in the government. For many, Bush became the symbol of failed leadership. And yet, some still defend him. They argue that he kept America safe after 9/11, and that his bold actions prevented more attacks on U.S. soil. To them, Bush was a president who made hard choices in impossible times. History, however, does not forgive easily. George W. Bush's legacy remains one of the most debated in modern politics. Was he a protector of freedom, or the man who ignited endless wars? One thing is certain: the world we live in today, its conflicts, its divisions, and its fragile peace was shaped in part by the decisions of George W. Bush. George W. Bush walked away from the White House, but the shadow of his choices never left the world. Iraq still struggles with chaos. The Middle East still burns from the flames of wars that began under his command, and America still debates whether his actions saved the nation or doomed it. History will ask one question: was George W. Bush a war hero who defended freedom, or a war criminal who betrayed it? The answer may depend on where you stand. Because in the end, George W. Bush's legacy is not written in books. Alone, it lives in the lives destroyed, the wars still raging, and the fear that one man's decision can change the fate of millions.